hardcover book hit Claire's temple with a sickening thud that echoed through the marble foyer. Claire Hamilton collapsed to the cold floor, her 7-month pregnant belly making the fall awkward and terrifying. Blood trickled from the gash above her left ear as her vision blurred. The heavy biography of Steve Jobs lay beside her, its corners stained red. "Claire, oh God, what have I done?" Richard Hamilton's voice cracked as he dropped to his knees beside his wife. His hands shook as he reached for his phone. "I need to call 911. Just minutes earlier, Claire had been standing at Richard's mahogany desk in their Beverly Hills mansion, holding bank statements that made her stomach churn. The numbers didn't lie. $200,000 had vanished from their joint account over the past 3 months. Money they had saved for the baby's nursery, for college, for their future. "Richard, we need to talk," she had said when he walked into his home office, still wearing his $1,000 suit from another successful day running his tech company. "Can it wait? I have calls to make," Richard replied without looking up from his phone. "No, it cannot wait." Claire's voice carried an edge he rarely heard. She placed the statements on his desk. "Where did this money go?" Richard's jaw tightened as he scanned the papers. "That's business. Claire, you wouldn't understand. I understand that you withdrew $50,000 last Tuesday and another $75,000 the week before that. This is our baby's money. Richard, don't you dare tell me how to manage our finances." Richard's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Everything we have exists because of my work, my company, my decisions." Claire's hands instinctively moved to her belly. "Our decisions, Richard. We're supposed to be partners." "Partners," Richard laughed bitterly. "You contribute what exactly your little nonprofit job that barely pays for your coffee habit?" The words stung, but Claire pressed forward. She had spent years walking on eggshells around Richard's temper, but their unborn daughter deserved better. "I found out where the money went. Richard, apartment 2307 at the Meridian Towers, your ex-girlfriend Jessica's apartment." Richard's face went white, then red. "You had no right to. I had every right. This is my family's future. You're gambling away on your mistress." "She's not my mistress," Richard said through gritted teeth. "It's complicated." "Complicated?" Claire's voice rose. "You're paying for another woman's luxury apartment while I'm pregnant with your child." "Lower your voice," Richard warned, moving closer. "The neighbors. I don't care about the neighbors. I care about our baby having a college fund instead of funding your affair." "It's not an affair," Richard exploded. "Jessica needed help after her divorce. It's temporary." "Temporary? The lease agreement I found in your office says otherwise." 2 years, Richard. You committed 2 years of our money to her?" Richard's hands clenched into fists. "How dare you go through my private papers? Private, we're married. There should be no private bank accounts, no secret apartments, no lies." "You're making a scene over nothing," Richard said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Nothing, Richard. This is $200,000. Do you understand what that means to our family?" "Our family will be fine. My company just landed the Peterson contract. We'll make it back." "That's not the point." Claire stepped closer to the desk. "The point is you made this decision without me. You prioritized another woman over your pregnant wife and unborn child." "Don't be so dramatic. Claire, you're being hormonal." The dismissal hit Claire like a slap. "Hormonal, Richard. I'm trying to save our marriage. If you can't see that paying for your ex-girlfriend's apartment is wrong, I'm done with this conversation," Richard said, moving toward the door. "No, you're not." Claire blocked his path. "I'm calling my mother. Dr. Morris needs to know what kind of man her daughter married." The mention of Claire's mother, the respected neurologist who had never approved of Richard, triggered something dark in his eyes. "You will not call your mother." "Watch me," Claire said, reaching for her phone. That's when Richard snapped. He grabbed the Steve Jobs biography from his desk and hurled it with all his strength. The book struck Claire's temple with devastating force. Now, as Claire lay bleeding on the marble floor, Richard's mind raced between genuine panic and calculated damage control. He dialed 911 with trembling fingers. 911, what's your emergency? My wife fell and hit her head. She's pregnant and bleeding. We need an ambulance immediately. Sir, is your wife conscious? Richard looked down at Claire. who was moaning softly, her eyes unfocused. "She's in and out of consciousness. We're dispatching paramedics to your location. What's the address?" As Richard provided their Beverly Hills address, he knelt beside Claire again. "It's going to be okay, baby. Help is coming." Claire's lips moved, but the words were barely audible. "You threw the book." "Shh, don't try to talk. You fell and hit your head on the coffee table. That's what happened. Claire, you fell." But even as Richard repeated the lie, he knew the truth would be harder to hide than he hoped. The book lay several feet away, stained with his wife's blood. The coffee table showed no signs of impact, and somewhere in Claire's injured mind, the real story remained intact. The sound of sirens grew louder as Richard quickly moved the blood-stained book to his desk drawer. He rehearsed his story. Claire had been upset about the pregnancy hormones. She got dizzy, she fell and struck her head on the corner of the coffee table. When the paramedics arrived, Richard opened the door with the practiced charm that had built his business empire. "Thank God you're here. My wife is 7 months pregnant, and she had a terrible fall." The female paramedic, Sarah Rodriguez, immediately assessed Claire's condition while her partner prepared the stretcher. "Sir, can you tell me exactly what happened?" Claire was feeling dizzy. Pregnancy hormones. You know, she lost her balance and fell, hitting her head on the coffee table edge. Sarah examined the head wound with experienced eyes. Something about the injury pattern didn't match a fall onto furniture. "Mrs. Hamilton, can you hear me?" Claire's eyes fluttered open. "My head hurts." "You're going to be okay. We're taking you to the hospital. Is this your husband?" Claire's gaze found Richard's face. For a moment, clarity returned to her eyes. She whispered something that made Sarah lean closer. "He threw the book at my head." Sarah's expression hardened, but she kept her voice professional. "Sir, we need to transport your wife immediately. You can follow us to Cedars-Sinai." As they loaded Claire onto the stretcher, Richard maintained his concerned husband facade, but inside, panic was setting in. Claire remembered. The paramedic had heard her whispered words. The carefully constructed lie was already beginning to crumble. The ambulance pulled away with Claire inside, and Richard hurried to his Range Rover. As he followed the flashing lights toward the hospital, he called his lawyer's emergency line. "Mitchell, it's Richard Hamilton. I need you to meet me at Cedars-Sinai immediately. We have a situation." The lawyer's voice was alert despite the late hour. "What kind of situation?" "The kind that could destroy everything I've built." As Richard drove through the streets of Beverly Hills, he didn't notice the security camera mounted on his neighbor's fence. The camera that had captured everything through the office window. The camera that would soon provide evidence of what really happened when a millionaire's rage exploded into violence against his pregnant wife. The ambulance raced through the streets of Beverly Hills while paramedic Sarah Rodriguez monitored Claire's vital signs. Claire drifted in and out of consciousness, her blood pressure concerning given her advanced pregnancy. "Mrs. Hamilton, stay with me," Sarah said, checking Claire's pupils for signs of concussion. "Can you tell me your name?" "Claire Hamilton," she whispered, her hand moving protectively to her belly. "Is my baby okay?" "We're going to take excellent care of both of you. Can you remember what happened tonight?" Claire's eyes filled with confusion and pain. "Richard, he was angry about the money. Jessica's apartment. He threw..." Her words trailed off as another wave of dizziness hit. Sarah exchanged a meaningful look with her partner, Marcus Chen, who was driving. They had responded to enough domestic violence calls to recognize the signs. "Mrs. Hamilton, did someone hurt you tonight?" Sarah asked gently. Before Claire could answer, her body tensed. "Something's wrong. The baby. I can't feel the baby moving." Sarah immediately checked the fetal monitor they had attached. The baby's heartbeat was present but irregular. "Marcus, call ahead to Cedars. Tell them we have a pregnant female with head trauma and possible fetal distress." At Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, Dr. Eugene Carter was finishing his evening rounds in the emergency department when the call came in. As an experienced emergency physician, he had seen his share of domestic violence cases disguised as accidents. Pregnant female, approximately 29 years old, head trauma from reported fall. The nurse briefed him as they prepared Trauma Bay 3. When the ambulance arrived, Dr. Carter immediately took charge. "Talk to me, Sarah. Claire Hamilton, 7 months pregnant, significant head trauma. Patient reports dizziness prior to alleged fall. Husband claims she fell and hit her head on coffee table. However, patient whispered to me that her husband threw a book at her head." Dr. Carter's expression grew serious as he examined Claire's injury. The impact pattern was inconsistent with a fall onto furniture. The wound showed the distinctive mark of a projectile impact. "Mrs. Hamilton, I'm Dr. Carter. We're going to take excellent care of you and your baby. Can you tell me what happened?" Claire's eyes were clearer now under the bright hospital lights. "Richard, my husband. He threw a book at my head, a heavy book. I confronted him about giving money to his ex-girlfriend. I understand. We're going to run some tests to make sure you and the baby are okay. First, I need to call someone." Dr. Carter stepped away and made a call to Dr. Vivian Morris, whom he knew from medical conferences. As fellow physicians, they had mutual respect, and he knew Dr. Morris was a neurologist. "Vivian, it's Eugene Carter at Cedars. I have your daughter Claire in my emergency department." There was a sharp intake of breath. "Claire, what happened?" "She has a significant head injury. She's 7 months pregnant. Her husband claims she fell, but the injury pattern suggests she was struck by an object. She's told 2 of my staff that her husband threw a book at her head. I'm coming immediately. Don't let that bastard anywhere near her." "Vivian, are you saying—" "I'm saying I've suspected Richard Hamilton of abuse for months. My daughter's been making excuses for bruises, for his controlling behavior. She's been isolating herself from family and friends. This escalation was inevitable." Dr. Carter's jaw tightened. "We'll protect her. I'm ordering a CT scan and fetal monitoring. How long will it take you to get here?" 20 minutes. Eugene, document everything. Every injury, every statement. If my daughter is ready to break free from this monster, I want evidence." Back in Trauma Bay 3, Claire was growing more agitated. "Where's Richard? Is he here?" Nurse Jennifer Walsh, who had been monitoring Claire's condition, noticed the patient's anxiety spike whenever her husband was mentioned. "He's in the waiting area. Would you like to see him?" "No." Claire's response was immediate and fearful. "Please, don't let him in here." "Not yet. I need to think." "Of course. You're in control here. Mrs. Hamilton, no one comes in without your permission." The CT scanner revealed what Dr. Carter feared. Claire had significant brain swelling, and the fetal monitoring showed the baby was in distress from the mother's trauma. "Mrs. Hamilton, the scan shows some swelling in your brain. It's serious but treatable. However, the stress has affected your baby. We need to monitor both of you very closely." "Will my baby be okay?" Claire asked, tears streaming down her face. "We're doing everything possible. The next 24 hours are critical. If the swelling increases or if the baby shows more distress, we may need to consider early delivery." The words hit Claire like another blow. Her baby, the innocent life she was carrying, was suffering because of Richard's violence. The reality of her situation began to crystallize through the pain medication. Dr. Vivian Morris arrived at the hospital like a force of nature. At 58, she commanded respect in every medical facility in Los Angeles. Her silver hair was pulled back severely, and her dark eyes blazed with protective fury. "Where is my daughter?" she demanded at the nurse's station. "Dr. Morris, I'm Dr. Carter. We spoke on the phone." Vivian's medical training took over as she followed Dr. Carter to Claire's room. "Show me the scans first. I need to see what we're dealing with." Dr. Carter pulled up the CT images on his tablet. "Subdural hematoma, significant swelling in the temporal lobe. The impact pattern is consistent with a projectile, not a fall. The baby, stressed but stable for now, we're monitoring continuously." When Dr. A. Morris entered Claire's room, her professional composure cracked for just a moment. Her daughter looked so vulnerable in the hospital bed, connected to monitors, a bandage covering the gash on her temple. "Mom," Claire's voice was small, like a child's. "I'm here, sweetheart." Dr. Carter explained what happened. "Tell me the truth about Richard." Claire closed her eyes, and for the first time in months, she felt safe enough to speak honestly. "He's been getting worse, Mom. More controlling, more angry. Tonight, When I confronted him about giving money to his ex-girlfriend, he just snapped. How long has he been violent? This was the first time he actually hit me, but there have been incidents, pushing, grabbing, throwing things near me. I kept telling myself it wasn't that bad, that he was just stressed from work. Dr. Morris felt her anger building, but she kept her voice calm and clinical. Claire, as your mother and as a neurologist, I need you to understand something. The injury you sustained could have killed you, could have killed your baby. This isn't stress from work. This is domestic violence, and it escalates. I know, Claire whispered. I know that now. Outside Claire's room, Richard Hamilton paced the waiting area like a caged animal. His lawyer, Mitchell Stevens, had arrived and was trying to coach him through the situation. Richard, stick to the story. She fell. You called for help immediately. Show concern for your wife and unborn child. Don't admit anything. But what if she tells them what really happened? Head injuries cause confusion, memory problems. Her account may not be reliable. What neither Richard nor his lawyer knew was that hospital security cameras had captured Richard's phone call to his attorney before calling 911. The timestamp would prove that his first instinct was legal protection, not medical help for his injured wife. Dr. Morris was documenting every detail of Claire's injuries when her phone buzzed. It was a text from Detective Shannon Brooks, a family friend and specialist in domestic violence cases. Vivian, heard about Claire. Are you ready to press charges? Dr. Morris looked at her daughter, who was finally resting peacefully under sedation. She typed back, meet me at the hospital. Bring your evidence kit. The next few hours would determine whether Richard Hamilton's wealth and influence could protect him from the consequences of his violence, or whether a mother's love and professional expertise would finally break the cycle of abuse. As midnight approached, Claire's brain pressure spiked dangerously, and alarms began sounding throughout the ICU. The battle for her life, and her baby's life, was just beginning. Dr. Vivian Morris stood over her daughter's hospital bed at 2 a.m, her trained eyes studying every detail of Claire's injury with the precision of a forensic neurologist. The impact pattern told a story that contradicted every word of Richard Hamilton's carefully rehearsed account. The trajectory is wrong, she murmured to Dr. McCarter, pointing to the wound. If Claire fell and struck the coffee table, the injury would be here, on the back of her head. This trauma is lateral, consistent with a projectile striking from the side. Dr. Carter nodded grimly. That's what I thought. The force required to create this much damage, it wasn't a fall. Claire stirred in the bed, her eyes fluttering open. Mom, how long have you been here? Long enough to examine your medical records and speak with the paramedics, Dr. Morris said, pulling a chair close to her daughter's bedside. Claire, I need you to tell me everything about tonight. Everything about Richard's behavior leading up to this. Claire's hand moved to her bandaged temple. The money. Mom, he'd been taking money from our accounts. $200,000 to pay for his ex-girlfriend's apartment. Jessica Morrison. You know about her. Dr. Morris's expression darkened. I know Richard dated her before you. I also know she has a restraining order against him from 2 years ago. This was news to Claire. A restraining order for what? Assault. She dropped the charges after Richard's family paid her to relocate to New York. Now it appears he's brought her back to Los Angeles. The pieces began falling into place for Claire. That's where the money went. He's been supporting her for months. What exactly happened when you confronted him? Claire closed her eyes, remembering. I found the bank statements. When I asked him about the withdrawals, he got defensive, said I wouldn't understand business decisions. But I kept pushing because this was our baby's future he was giving away. Then what? He admitted he was paying for Jessica's apartment, called it temporary help after her divorce. But I found the lease agreement. Mom, 2 years. He committed 2 years of our money to her. Dr. Morris clenched her jaw. And that's when he became violent. When I threatened to call you, he said I was being hormonal, dramatic. When I reached for my phone to call you anyway, he grabbed that heavy Steve Jobs book from his desk and threw it at my head. Claire, this isn't the first incident, is it? Claire was quiet for a long moment. No, there have been other things. He's pushed me, grabbed my arms hard enough to leave bruises. He's thrown things at the wall near my head. I kept telling myself it wasn't that bad because he never actually hit me before. Why didn't you tell me? Because I knew you'd react exactly like this, Claire said weakly. You never liked Richard. I thought if I told you about his temper, you'd try to convince me to leave him. I would have, and I would have been right. Dr. Morris's phone buzzed with a text from Detective Shannon Brooks. Outside Claire's room. Ready when you are. Claire, Detective Brooks is here. She specializes in domestic violence cases. Are you ready to tell her what Richard did? Fear flickered in Claire's eyes. What if he finds out I talked to the police? He's not going to hurt you again. I promise you that. Detective Shannon Brooks entered the room with the quiet confidence of someone who had investigated hundreds of domestic violence cases. At 42, she had seen every excuse, every lie, every manipulation tactic that abusive men employed. Claire, I'm Detective Brooks. I'm here to help you and your baby stay safe. My mom says you specialize in cases like this. I do, and I want you to know that what happened to you tonight is a felony. Assault on a pregnant woman carries serious penalties in California. Claire looked between her mother and the detective. What happens if I press charges? We arrest Richard, document all the evidence, and the district attorney's office prosecutes him. Given your injuries and your pregnancy, he'll likely face several years in prison. And if I don't press charges, Detective Brooks' expression was grave. Domestic violence escalates. Claire, the next incident could kill you or your baby. Statistics show that 75% of domestic violence murders happen when the victim tries to leave or after they've left. I'm scared, Claire admitted. Doctor, Morris took her daughter's hand. I'm going to ask you something as your mother and as a medical professional. Do you want your daughter to grow up thinking it's normal for men to hurt women? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Claire placed both hands on her belly, feeling the baby move for the first time since the assault. No, I want her to be strong, to know she deserves better. Then let's make sure she never sees her father hurt her mother again. Detective Brooks opened her case file. Claire, I need you to walk me through tonight's events step by step. Start with when you first discovered the missing money. As Claire recounted the evening's events, Detective Brooks documented everything. The financial deception, the escalating argument, Richard's specific threats, and the moment he threw the book. You said he threatened to shut you up permanently if you embarrassed him. Did he specify how? No, but the way he said it, I believed him. Detective Brooks made a note. Have there been other threats of violence? He said things like, I better watch my attitude, or I wouldn't like what happened next. He's told me that no one would believe me if I complained about him because he's successful and respected. Classic abuser tactics, Detective Brooks said. Claire, I need to examine your medical records and speak with the paramedics who brought you in. Is that okay? Yes. As Detective Brooks reviewed the evidence, her phone rang. The caller ID showed Cedars-Sinai Security. Detective Brooks, this is Marcus Webb, head of hospital security. We've reviewed our footage from tonight. Richard Hamilton made several phone calls in our parking lot before coming inside. One was to his attorney. The timestamp shows he called his lawyer before he called 911. Can you send me that footage? Already done. We've also noticed his behavior in the waiting room. He's been coaching his story with his attorney, rehearsing answers to potential questions. Detective Brooks looked at Dr. Morris with satisfaction. That's consciousness of guilt. It proves he knew he committed a crime. Meanwhile, in the hospital corridor, Richard was growing increasingly agitated. His lawyer had been updating him on potential legal exposure, and the news wasn't good. If Claire testifies, and if her mother backs up the medical evidence, you're looking at serious felony charges, Mitchell Stevens warned. How serious? 5 to 10 years, potentially more given the pregnancy factor and your financial means to flee. Richard's face went pale. There has to be something we can do. What about claiming she's unstable pregnancy hormones? Depression? Something? Richard, there's security footage of you disposing of something in the hospital dumpster. If that's the book you threw at her, it's physical evidence. Richard's hands shook. He had indeed disposed of the blood-stained biography, thinking hospital dumpsters wouldn't be monitored. He was wrong. Back in Claire's room, Detective Brooks was preparing to make an arrest. Claire, based on your statement, the medical evidence, and the physical evidence we've recovered, I have probable cause to arrest Richard for felony domestic violence. What happens now? I arrest him tonight. He'll be booked and held without bail until his arraignment. Given the severity of the charges and his financial resources, the court will likely consider him a flight risk. Dr. Morris squeezed her daughter's hand. You're doing the right thing, sweetheart. I know, but I'm terrified of what comes next. What comes next is that you and your baby are safe, Detective Brooks said. And Richard Hamilton learns that wealth and power don't put anyone above the law. As Detective Brooks left to make the arrest, neither she nor Dr. Morris noticed the hospital security guard approaching Claire's room. The guard who had been paid $5,000 cash by Richard's attorney to overhear and report back on any conversations with police. The battle for Claire's safety was just beginning, and Richard Hamilton was about to deploy every resource at his disposal to avoid the consequences of his violence. Detective Shannon Brooks found Richard Hamilton in the hospital waiting room at 3:15 in the morning, still consulting with his attorney in hushed, urgent tones. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair disheveled, and his eyes showed the strain of maintaining his fabricated story. Mr. Hamilton, I'm Detective Brooks with the Los Angeles Police Department. I need to speak with you about your wife's injuries. Richard stood, automatically extending his hand for a businessman's handshake. Of course, Detective, I'm happy to help however I can. This has been a terrible accident. Detective Brooks ignored his outstretched hand. Sir, I need you to accompany me for questioning regarding the assault on your wife. Assault? Richard's attorney, Mitchell Stevens, stepped forward. Detective, my client reported an accidental fall. There's been no mention of assault. That's because your client lied in his initial report. Detective Brooks produced her badge and handcuffs. Richard Hamilton, you're under arrest for felony domestic violence, assault on a pregnant woman, and filing a false police report. The waiting room went silent as other families turned to stare. Richard's face flushed with embarrassment and rage. This is ridiculous. I'm the one who called for help. I saved my wife's life. You have the right to remain silent, Detective Brooks continued, placing handcuffs on Richard's wrists. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. I want to see my wife, Richard demanded as she led him toward the exit. Your wife has requested no contact with you. A restraining order will be in place within hours. Mitchell Stevens followed them. Detective, my client is a respected businessman with no criminal record. This appears to be a misunderstanding based on the confused recollections of an injured woman. Detective Brooks stopped walking and faced the attorney. Mr. Stevens, your client threw a 2-pound hardcover book at his 7 months pregnant wife's head, causing brain trauma that could have killed her and her unborn child. The medical evidence is conclusive. The physical evidence includes the blood-stained book he disposed of in the hospital dumpster. This isn't a misunderstanding. It's attempted murder. Richard's legs nearly gave out. You found the book. Richard, don't say another word, his attorney warned, but it was too late. So you admit you disposed of evidence? Detective Brooks asked. The admission hung in the air like a confession. Other people in the waiting room were now openly staring and whispering. Richard's carefully maintained reputation was crumbling in real time. As they reached the parking garage, Mitchell Stevens tried damage control. Detective, my client is willing to cooperate fully. Perhaps we can work out an arrangement that avoids the trauma of a public trial for his pregnant wife. Your client can cooperate by confessing to what he did and accepting responsibility for his actions. Beyond that, the district attorney will determine how this proceeds. Richard was placed in the back of Detective Brooks's unmarked car, his mind racing. Through the window, he could see the media vans already arriving. Somehow, word had leaked about his arrest, and photographers were setting up outside the hospital's main entrance. How did the press find out? He asked. Detective Brooks glanced in the rearview mirror. Domestic violence against pregnant women makes headlines, especially when the perpetrator is a millionaire tech executive. During the drive to the police station, Richard's phone rang continuously. His business partners, board members, and investors were already learning about his arrest through social media and news alerts. His company's stock price would plummet when the markets opened. At the police station, Detective Brooks led Richard through the booking process. Fingerprints, photographs, inventory of personal belongings. Each step hammered home the reality that his life as he knew it was over. "I want to make a phone call," Richard said. "You can call your attorney once you're processed." In the holding cell, Richard sat on the metal bench and tried to process how quickly everything had unraveled. 12 hours ago, he was a successful CEO preparing for bed in his Beverly Hills mansion. Now he was facing years in prison for a moment of rage. Back at the hospital, Dr. Morris was updating Claire on the arrest. "Richard is in custody. Detective Brooks says the evidence is overwhelming." "What happens to our house, our finances?" Claire asked, the practical concerns beginning to surface. "California law prevents him from accessing joint assets while facing domestic violence charges. You'll have full control of the accounts and property." "I can't afford that house on my own." "You don't need to afford it. You need to heal and prepare for your daughter's birth. Everything else can be sorted out later." Claire's hospital room phone rang. "Dr. Morris answered. "Dr. Morris speaking. This is Grace Hamilton, Richard's mother. I demand to see my daughter-in-law immediately." Dr. Morris's voice turned icy. "Mrs. Hamilton, visiting hours are over, and Claire is not receiving visitors. This is a family matter. I'm sure we can resolve this misunderstanding without involving the police." "There's no misunderstanding. Your son committed felony assault on my pregnant daughter. He's in jail where he belongs." "Dr. Morris, I think you're overreacting. Richard would never hurt Claire intentionally. She must have misunderstood his actions." The audacity of the statement left Dr. Morris speechless for a moment. "Mrs. Hamilton, your son threw a 2-pound book at Claire's head. The impact caused brain trauma. There's no misunderstanding that. Accidents happen during arguments. Surely we can handle this privately. The only thing being handled privately is Claire's medical care. Everything else is a matter for the courts." After hanging up, Dr. Morris turned to Claire. "Richard's mother wants to visit." "Absolutely not. Grace has always blamed me for Richard's problems. She'll try to convince me this was my fault." "No one's getting near you without your permission. I promise." Detective Brooks returned to the hospital at dawn with an update. "Richard's been denied bail. The judge considered him a flight risk given his financial resources and the severity of the charges." "How long will he stay in jail?" Claire asked. "Until trial, most likely. His attorney is already talking about plea bargains, but the district attorney wants to send a message about domestic violence." "What kind of message?" "That money and status don't buy immunity from consequences. Richard Hamilton is going to face the full weight of the law." As the sun rose over Los Angeles, Claire realized she was free for the first time in years. Free from Richard's control, his threats, his manipulation. The price had been nearly her life and her daughter's safety. But she had survived. The legal battle ahead would be fierce. Richard's family had unlimited resources and political connections. But Claire had something more powerful: the truth, documented medical evidence, and a mother who would move heaven and earth to protect her. The war for justice was just beginning. Grace Hamilton arrived at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center at 8 in the morning, dressed in her finest Chanel suit and armed with the righteous indignation of a woman who believed her son could do no wrong. At 62, she had spent 4 decades cleaning up Richard's messes, making excuses for his behavior, and writing checks to make problems disappear. "I'm here to see Claire Hamilton," she announced to the nurse's station with the authority of someone accustomed to getting her way. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Hamilton is not receiving visitors," the nurse replied politely. "I'm family. I'm her mother-in-law. She specifically requested no visits from family members other than her mother and brother." Grace's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide her shock. "This is absurd. I demand to speak with someone in charge." Dr. Morris appeared in the hallway, having heard the commotion from Claire's room. "Mrs. Hamilton, I believe I made our position clear during our phone conversation." "Dr. Morris, surely we can discuss this situation rationally. Richard made a mistake, but involving the police was unnecessary." "A mistake?" Dr. Morris's voice rose slightly. "Your son threw a book at my pregnant daughter's head. She has brain trauma. Our grandchild could have died." Grace waved dismissively. "Richard was probably trying to get her attention, and she got in the way. You know how dramatic Claire can be. The casual dismissal of attempted murder left Dr. Morris speechless. Mrs. Hamilton, I'm a neurologist. I've examined the injury personally. Your son struck my daughter with enough force to cause significant brain trauma. Brain trauma sounds very serious when you put it that way, but people recover from bumps on the head all the time. This wasn't a bump. This was assault with a deadly weapon. Grace's composure cracked slightly. Richard is a successful businessman, not a violent criminal. This whole situation has been blown completely out of proportion. Perhaps you should visit your son in jail and ask him to explain why he disposed of the blood-stained book in a hospital dumpster. Before Grace could respond, Tyler Morris arrived, having driven through the night from San Francisco when his mother called. At 31, Tyler was a successful software engineer, but more importantly, he was fiercely protective of his sister. Tyler, thank God you're here, Dr. Morris said, embracing her son. Tyler's eyes immediately found Grace Hamilton. You must be Richard's mother. I am, and you must be the brother who's encouraging this vindictive prosecution of my son. Tyler's jaw tightened. Lady, I'm encouraging my sister to press charges against the man who tried to kill her and her unborn child. That's a ridiculous exaggeration. Richard lost his temper for a moment. It happens in every marriage. No, it doesn't, Tyler said firmly. In healthy marriages, people don't throw books at each other's heads. Grace pulled out her phone. I'm calling my attorney. This family is clearly not interested in resolving this matter reasonably. You're right, Dr. Morris said. We're interested in seeing your son prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. As Grace made her phone call, Tyler asked his mother quietly, how is Claire really? Physically, she's stable. The brain swelling has decreased. Emotionally, she's terrified but determined. She wants to protect her daughter. Good, Richard needs to face consequences for what he did. Grace finished her call and approached them again. My attorney is prepared to offer a substantial settlement in exchange for dropping the charges. This isn't a civil matter, Dr. Morris replied. This is criminal. The state of California is prosecuting your son. Everything has a price. Dr. Morris, what would it take to make this go away? Tyler stepped forward, his anger barely contained. Are you seriously trying to bribe us? I'm trying to protect my family's reputation and my son's future. What about Claire's future? What about your grandchild's safety? Grace's mask slipped completely. Claire knew what she was getting into when she married Richard. He's always had a temper. If she couldn't handle that, she shouldn't have provoked him. The victim blaming was too much for Tyler. Get out. Get out of this hospital before I call security. You can't ban me from visiting my daughter-in-law. Watch me, Dr. Morris said, signaling to the security guard. Mrs. Hamilton is not welcome in this hospital. Please escort her from the premises. As Grace was led away, she called back. This isn't over. My family has resources you can't imagine. Richard will be home within a week. Inside Claire's room, the confrontation in the hallway had been audible. Claire looked pale and shaken when her mother and brother entered. I heard everything, Claire said weakly. She blames me, doesn't she? Tyler sat beside his sister's bed. Grace Hamilton is in denial about who her son really is. That's not your problem. But Tyler, she's right about one thing. Richard's family does have resources. They have political connections, expensive lawyers, influence. And we have the truth, Dr. Morris said firmly. We have medical evidence, witness testimony, and physical evidence. Money can't change facts. You don't know the Hamiltons like I do, Claire said. They've been covering up Richard's problems his entire life. In prep school, he assaulted a girlfriend. Grace paid the family to transfer their daughter to another school and keep quiet. This was news to both Dr. Morris and Tyler. How do you know that? Tyler asked. Richard told me himself. He was bragging about how his mother always protected him. He said no matter what happened, Grace would fix it. Dr. Morris pulled out her phone. I'm calling Detective Brooks. She needs to know about this pattern of behavior. While Dr. Morris made the call, Tyler held his sister's hand. Claire, I need to ask you something difficult. Why didn't you leave Richard before this happened? Claire was quiet for a long moment. because leaving felt more dangerous than staying. Richard always said if I ever left him, he'd make sure I lost everything. The house, the money, access to our child. He said his lawyers would prove I was an unfit mother. Those were threats designed to control you. I know that now. But when you're living it, when someone is isolating you from friends and family, making you doubt your own judgment, you start to believe their version of reality. Tyler squeezed her hand. Well, you're not alone anymore. Mom and I are here, and we're not going anywhere. Dr. Morris returned with news from Detective Brooks. The detective is very interested in the prep school incident. She's going to contact the victim and see if she's willing to testify. What if she's not? Then we proceed with the evidence we have. But if there's a pattern of violence, it strengthens the case significantly. Claire's phone buzzed with a text message. Her face went white as she read it. What is it? Tyler asked. It's from Grace. She says Richard's attorney is filing for emergency custody of the baby. They're claiming I'm mentally unstable and a danger to our child. The audacity of the legal maneuver was breathtaking. Richard was in jail for assaulting his pregnant wife, yet his family was trying to claim she was the dangerous parent. Dr. Morris's medical training kicked in. They can't take a baby from its mother without extraordinary circumstances. And given that Richard is the one facing criminal charges, no judge would grant him custody. But they could try to place the baby with Grace, Claire realized. Richard's mother as temporary guardian. The thought of her newborn daughter being raised by the woman who had just blamed Claire for her own assault was terrifying. Over my dead body, Tyler said grimly. We need a family law attorney. Dr. Morris said, someone who specializes in protecting mothers and children from abusive fathers. As if summoned by their conversation, Detective Brooks appeared in the doorway. I have news about Richard's prep school incident. The victim, Jennifer Walsh, is now a successful attorney in Portland. She's willing to testify about what Richard did to her 15 years ago. What happened to her? Claire asked. Richard pushed her down a flight of stairs during an argument. She suffered a broken arm and a concussion. Sound familiar? The pattern was unmistakable. Richard's violence wasn't a one-time loss of control. It was an established pattern of behavior that had been covered up by his family's money and influence. There's more, Detective Brooks continued. We've found 2 other women who dated Richard in college and after. Both report similar incidents of physical violence. Will they testify? They're considering it. Seeing Richard finally face consequences has given them courage to come forward. As the evidence mounted against Richard, Claire felt a mixture of vindication and sadness. She was finally seeing her husband clearly, but it meant accepting that the man she had loved was a dangerous predator who had fooled her for years. The battle lines were drawn. On one side, Richard's wealth, his family's influence, and a legal team prepared to destroy Claire's reputation to save their client. On the other side, the truth, medical evidence, and a growing chorus of victims ready to break their silence. The war for justice was escalating, and Claire was no longer fighting alone. 3 days after the assault, Claire's medical condition had stabilized enough for her to give a comprehensive statement to Detective Brooks and Prosecutor Margaret Lane. The swelling in her brain had decreased significantly, and her baby's heartbeat was strong and steady. Claire, I need you to walk me through your relationship with Richard from the beginning, Margaret Lane said, settling into the chair beside Claire's hospital bed. At 51, the prosecutor had built her career on putting domestic abusers behind bars. When we first met, Richard was charming, successful, attentive. Everything seemed perfect. When did that change? Claire thought carefully. About 6 months after we moved in together. Small things at first. He didn't like my friends. Said they were jealous of our relationship. He convinced me to quit my job at the nonprofit because he made enough money for both of us. Classic isolation tactics, Detective Brooks noted. What else? He started managing our money completely. Said I didn't understand investment strategies. He gave me an allowance like I was a child. When I questioned expenses, he'd get angry and say I was ungrateful. Margaret Lane made notes. Did the financial control escalate? He monitored my credit cards, questioned every purchase. If I bought something without asking, he'd return it and lecture me about fiscal responsibility. But he spent whatever he wanted on himself. When did physical intimidation begin? Claire's hand moved unconsciously to her belly. About a year ago. He started standing too close when he was angry, backing me against walls. He'd grab my wrist when I tried to walk away from arguments. Did you tell anyone? I was too embarrassed. Richard convinced me that his behavior was normal, that I was too sensitive. He said all successful men needed to be assertive to maintain respect in their relationships. Dr. Morris spoke up from her position by the window. Claire, show them your wrists. Claire reluctantly extended her arms. Faded bruises were visible around both wrists, finger-shaped marks that told their own story. When did he do this? Margaret Lane asked, photographing the injuries. Last week, I tried to leave the room during an argument about his late nights at work. He grabbed me and held me against the wall until I agreed to listen to him explain why I was wrong. Detective Brooks exchanged a look with the prosecutor. Claire, we've been investigating Richard's past relationships. We've found a pattern of escalating abuse with multiple women. How many women? 4 that we know of. Jennifer Walsh, the prep school victim, is flying in tomorrow to meet with us. She's now a successful attorney and wants to help put Richard away. Claire felt a mixture of relief and guilt. Relief that she wasn't alone. Guilt that other women had suffered because Richard's behavior had been covered up instead of prosecuted. There's something else, Detective Brooks continued. We've obtained Richard's financial records. The money he gave to Jessica Morrison wasn't just for her apartment. What was it for? Silence? Jessica was also a victim of Richard's violence. He's been paying her $200,000 to keep quiet about an assault that happened 3 years ago. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Richard hadn't been supporting an ex-girlfriend out of kindness. He had been paying hush money to another victim. We want to contact Jessica, Margaret Lane said. With her testimony added to Jennifer's and yours, we can establish a clear pattern of domestic violence spanning over a decade. Claire's friend Nadine Walsh chose that moment to arrive with flowers and a worried expression. She had been trying to visit for 2 days but had been turned away due to the restricted visitor list. Claire, honey, what happened? The news said Richard was arrested for assault, but that can't be right. Claire looked at her best friend, remembering all the times Nadine had questioned Richard's controlling behavior, all the times Claire had defended him. It's right. Nadine, Richard threw a book at my head during an argument. I have brain trauma. Nadine's face went white. Oh my God, Claire, I'm so sorry. I should have pushed harder when I saw the warning signs. What warning signs? Detective Brooks asked. Nadine looked between Claire and the detective. Richard's jealousy about Claire's friendships. He discouraged her from spending time with anyone. When we did get together, he'd call constantly, checking up on her. He made her feel guilty for having a life outside their relationship. Did you witness any physical aggression? Not directly, but Claire would make excuses for injuries. A bruise on her arm was from bumping into a door. A cut on her lip was from biting it while eating. I suspected, but Claire always had explanations. Claire felt tears forming. I was protecting him. Wasn't I making excuses? Covering up his behavior? You were surviving, Margaret Lane said gently. Victims often protect their abusers as a survival mechanism. Dr. Morris pulled up security footage on her tablet. We've obtained surveillance from your home security system. Richard didn't know the backup files were stored in the cloud. The footage showed multiple incidents over the past year. Richard shoving Claire against a wall, throwing objects near her head, grabbing her roughly during arguments. In each case, Claire could be seen trying to de-escalate, apologizing, backing down. This establishes the pattern of escalating violence leading up to the book incident, Detective Brooks explained. It shows this wasn't a one-time loss of control. Margaret Lane reviewed her notes. Claire, we have enough evidence to convict Richard without your testimony, but if you're willing to testify, it would ensure he receives the maximum sentence. What's the maximum? For assault on a pregnant woman with prior domestic violence incidents, we're looking at 8 to 12 years. The number stunned Claire. That long. Domestic violence is a serious crime that often escalates to murder. The court takes threats to pregnant women very seriously. Claire's phone buzzed with another text from Grace Hamilton. My attorney says you can still drop the charges. Richard has learned his lesson. Think about your daughter's future. Claire showed the message to Detective Brooks, who immediately made a note. That's witness intimidation. Grace Hamilton is now also facing criminal charges. She's still trying to get me to drop the case. Abusive families often pressure victims to protect the abuser. It's another form of control. Nadine sat on the edge of Claire's bed. What do you want to do? Claire looked around the room at the people supporting her. Her mother, her brother who had driven through the night, her best friend, and the law enforcement professionals working to protect her. I want to testify. I want Richard to face consequences for what he's done. But more than that, I want other women to see that wealth and charm don't excuse violence. It won't be easy, Margaret Lane warned. Richard's attorneys will try to destroy your credibility. They'll paint you as unstable, vindictive, a gold digger who trapped him with a pregnancy. Let them try, Claire said with growing strength. The evidence speaks for itself. Dr. Morris smiled proudly at her daughter. Claire, you're stronger than you know. I'm learning that. For years, Richard convinced me I was weak, that I needed him to survive. But surviving his violence, protecting my daughter, standing up for myself and other victims, that takes real strength. Detective Brooks gathered her files. We'll arrange security for you during the trial. Richard's family has resources, and they've already shown willingness to intimidate witnesses. What about after the trial? We'll help you get a permanent restraining order. Richard will be in prison for years, and when he's released, he'll be prohibited from contacting you or your daughter. As the legal team prepared to leave, Claire felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. Hope for a future free from fear, free from Richard's control, free from violence. The truth was finally emerging, and with it, the possibility of real justice. 1 week after the assault, prosecutor Margaret Lane sat in her downtown Los Angeles office, surrounded by evidence that painted a disturbing picture of Richard Hamilton's pattern of violence against women. The case had grown from a single incident of domestic violence into a comprehensive prosecution spanning multiple victims and 15 years of abuse. Jennifer Walsh arrived this morning, Detective Brooks reported. She's ready to testify about what Richard did to her in prep school. Margaret reviewed Jennifer's statement. Pushed down a flight of stairs during an argument about her wanting to break up. Broken arm, concussion, and the school covered it up after Grace Hamilton made a substantial donation to their capital campaign. Same pattern as Claire's assault? Loss of control when the woman tries to assert independence? What about Jessica Morrison? Detective Brooks flipped through her notes. Harder case. She's terrified of Richard and his family. 3 years ago, he shoved her into a glass coffee table during an argument. She needed 12 stitches. Grace Hamilton paid her medical bills and gave her money to relocate to New York. But she came back to Los Angeles because Richard convinced her he'd changed, started paying for her apartment 6 months ago. She thought it was guilt money, but it was actually hush money to keep her quiet about the assault. Margaret Lane leaned back in her chair. 4 victims spanning 15 years, each incident escalating in severity. This isn't a man with anger management issues. This is a predator. Millionaire. Richard's attorneys are already working on their defense strategy, Detective Brooks warned. They're hiring private investigators to dig up dirt on all the victims. Let them try. The medical evidence is conclusive, and we have multiple corroborating witnesses. At Cedars-Sinai, Claire was preparing for discharge. Her brain swelling had resolved, and her baby's condition was stable. But leaving the safety of the hospital meant facing the reality of her new life as a domestic violence survivor. Are you sure you don't want to stay with me? Dr. Morris asked as she helped Claire pack. Mom, I need to go home. I need to face what happened there and reclaim my space. Tyler finished loading Claire's belongings into a wheelchair. I've changed all the locks, installed new security cameras, and arranged for a security service. Richard can't get anywhere near the house. What about Grace? She has keys. Not anymore. I also got a restraining order against her for witness intimidation. Claire smiled weakly. Richard must be furious. Richard is in jail where he belongs, Dr. Morris said firmly. His feelings are no longer your concern. The drive to Beverly Hills was surreal for Claire, passing through her exclusive neighborhood. She saw neighbors who had no idea their successful neighbor was a violent criminal. The perfectly manicured lawns and luxury cars seemed to belong to a different world now. Inside her house, Claire was surprised by how different everything felt. The marble foyer where she had bled was now just cold stone. Richard's office. once a shrine to his success, looked like the workspace of a stranger. "I've packed all of Richard's belongings," Tyler said. "They're in the garage. You don't have to see his things if you don't want to." Claire walked into Richard's office and sat behind his desk. For the first time in their relationship, she was in his chair, in his space, with access to his private world. "I want to go through his files," she said. "If Richard has hurt other women, there might be evidence here." Dr. Morris looked concerned. "Claire, the police have already searched the house. They were looking for evidence of the assault. I'm looking for evidence of other victims, other cover-ups." Claire opened Richard's desk drawers methodically. Most contained business documents, but one drawer was locked. Using tools Tyler had brought, they forced it open. Inside was a file labeled Personal Legal Matters. It contained settlement agreements, non-disclosure agreements, and checks made out to various women over the past decade. "This is it," Claire breathed. "This is proof that Richard's been paying women to keep quiet about his violence." The file contained 4 different settlement agreements. Jennifer Walsh's name was on one, Jessica Morrison's on another. 2 other women Claire had never heard of had also received payments in exchange for silence about personal disputes with Richard. "We need to call Detective Brooks immediately," Tyler said. While Tyler made the call, Claire continued searching. In Richard's computer, she found email exchanges with his attorney about managing potential public relations issues and neutralizing disgruntled former associates. The emails revealed a coordinated effort to silence Richard's victims through intimidation, financial pressure, and legal threats. Grace Hamilton was mentioned frequently as the source of funds for these cover-ups. Detective Brooks arrived within an hour, bringing Margaret Lane with her. "Claire, this evidence is explosive. It shows premeditation and conspiracy to obstruct justice." "What does this mean for the trial?" Claire asked. Margaret Lane examined the documents. "It means we can charge Richard and his mother with additional crimes. Witness tampering, obstruction of justice, possibly racketeering if we can prove an ongoing criminal enterprise. Will the other victims testify now? With this evidence, they might feel safer coming forward." The documents proved they were telling the truth about Richard's violence. Claire's phone rang. The caller ID showed Richard's attorney. "Don't answer," Margaret Lane warned. The phone went to voicemail. After it stopped ringing, Claire played the message on speaker. "Mrs. Hamilton, this is Mitchell Stevens. I'm calling on behalf of your husband to discuss a resolution to this unfortunate situation. Mr. Hamilton is prepared to offer a substantial settlement in exchange for your cooperation in resolving these charges. Please call me at your earliest convenience." "Settlement offer," Detective Brooks noted. "Another attempt to buy silence?" "The audacity is breathtaking," Dr. Morris said. "He assaults my daughter and then tries to bribe her to drop charges." Margaret Lane smiled grimly. "Actually, this works in our favor. Attempting to bribe a victim is additional evidence of consciousness of guilt." Claire looked at the prosecutor. "What happens if I call him back and record the conversation? We could set up a controlled call with recording equipment. If he makes specific offers to drop charges in exchange for money, that's felony witness tampering. Let's do it." 2 hours later, Claire sat in Detective Brooks' office wearing a recording device, surrounded by law enforcement officers. Margaret Lane coached her on what to say and what not to say. Keep him talking about the settlement offer. Get him to be specific about the amount and what he expects in return. Claire dialed Mitchell Stevens' number, her heart pounding. "Mrs. Hamilton, thank you for calling back. I trust you're feeling better." "I'm recovering. You mentioned a settlement." "Yes, Mr. Hamilton recognizes that this situation has caused you distress. He's prepared to offer $2 million in exchange for your cooperation in resolving the criminal charges." "What kind of cooperation?" "A simple statement that the incident was accidental, that you may have misremembered the events due to your head injury." "You want me to lie?" "I want you to consider your daughter's future. $2 million would ensure her education, her security. A public trial would be traumatic for everyone involved." Claire looked at Margaret Lane, who nodded encouragingly. "What about the other women Richard hurt?" There was silence on the line. "I'm not sure what you mean. Jennifer Walsh, Jessica Morrison, the others. Would they get settlements too?" Mrs. Hamilton, I think we should focus on your situation. My situation is that your client has a pattern of violence against women, and your family has a pattern of covering it up with money. I think this conversation has become unproductive. Please consider my client's offer carefully. After Stevens hung up, the room erupted in satisfaction. Perfect, Margaret Lane said. Clear evidence of attempted witness tampering. Claire felt a sense of power she hadn't experienced in years. For the first time, I have leverage over Richard instead of him having leverage over me. How does it feel? Detective Brooks asked. Like waking up from a nightmare. Like remembering who I used to be before Richard convinced me I was powerless. The case against Richard Hamilton was now ironclad. Multiple victims, medical evidence, financial records, and recorded attempts at witness tampering. But Claire knew the real battle was just beginning. Richard's family would deploy every resource to destroy her credibility and avoid conviction. The war for justice was entering its most dangerous phase. 2 weeks before the trial, Claire faced her greatest test yet. Richard's defense team had unleashed a coordinated attack on her character, hiring private investigators to examine every aspect of her past and releasing carefully selected information to the media designed to paint her as an unstable gold digger. Pregnant wife's secret, past financial troubles and mental health issues before marriage to tech millionaire. Read the headline in the Los Angeles Tribune. Claire sat in Margaret Lane's office, staring at the newspaper with a mixture of rage and humiliation. They make it sound like I trapped Richard with the pregnancy. It's a standard defense strategy, Margaret Lane explained. Destroy the victim's credibility by any means necessary. The good news is that juries see through this tactic. But what if they don't? What if people believe Richard's version? Detective Brooks leaned forward. Claire, remember what we discussed. Richard's team is desperate because the evidence against him is overwhelming. These character attacks are actually signs of weakness, not strength. Dr. Morris had been reading the article with growing anger. They're claiming Claire has a history of mental instability because she sought counseling after her father's death 5 years ago. Grief counseling is evidence of mental health care, not mental illness. They're also making much of the fact that Claire had student loan debt when she married Richard, Margaret Lane noted. As if being a working-class woman who paid for her own education somehow makes her untrustworthy. Claire's phone buzzed constantly with calls from reporters, bloggers, and tabloid journalists wanting her side of the story. Tyler had taken over screening her calls, but the media attention was overwhelming. There's more, Detective Brooks said reluctantly. Richard's team has hired a PR firm. They're conducting a whisper campaign about your pregnancy, suggesting you manipulated Richard into marriage. That's disgusting, Tyler said. Claire and Richard tried to get pregnant for 2 years. There are medical records proving they sought fertility counseling. Actually, that helps us, Margaret Lane realized. If Claire was trying to trap Richard, why would they have spent 2 years and thousands of dollars on fertility treatments? Despite the legal team's confidence, Claire felt her resolve wavering under the constant attacks. The stress was affecting her pregnancy, and her doctor had warned about the risk of early labor. I keep thinking maybe I should just take the settlement and disappear, Claire admitted. Get away from all this. Raise my daughter somewhere quiet. Claire, look at me, Dr. Morris said firmly. If you take Richard's money and sign a non-disclosure agreement, what happens to the next woman he dates? What happens when your daughter is old enough to ask why her father is in prison? I know, but I'm so tired of fighting. Nadine Walsh, who had been quietly supportive throughout the ordeal, finally spoke up. Claire, I need to tell you something. I've been following the media coverage, and there's something you should know about public opinion. More bad news. Actually, no. For every negative article about you, there are dozens of supportive comments from women sharing their own stories of domestic violence. You've become a symbol of courage for survivors. Nadine showed Claire her tablet, scrolling through social media posts from women around the country who had found strength in Claire's willingness to prosecute her wealthy abuser. Claire Hamilton gives me hope that rich men can't buy their way out of consequences. Nadine read aloud. If she can face down a millionaire and his lawyers, maybe I can leave my abusive husband too? Claire felt tears forming. I never wanted to be a symbol. I just wanted justice. Sometimes those are the same thing, Margaret Lane said gently. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Jennifer Walsh, the prep school victim, held a press conference in Portland announcing her support for Claire and revealing additional details about Richard's past violence. 15 years ago, Richard Hamilton pushed me down a flight of stairs because I wanted to break up with him, Jennifer said to the assembled reporters. His family paid mine to keep quiet and transfer me to another school. I've lived with the guilt of my silence ever since. Jennifer's press conference prompted an avalanche of media coverage focusing on the pattern of abuse rather than attacks on Claire's character. Other victims began coming forward publicly, sharing their stories of Richard's violence and his family's cover-ups. The narrative is shifting, Margaret Lane observed. Richard is no longer the successful businessman brought down by a vindictive wife. He's a serial abuser whose victims are finally being heard. But Richard's defense team wasn't finished. That afternoon, Grace Hamilton held her own press conference outside the Los Angeles courthouse. My son is the victim of a vindictive prosecution by a disturbed woman who trapped him with a pregnancy, Grace declared. Richard Hamilton is a pillar of the community, a job creator, a philanthropist. These charges are a travesty of justice. Grace's performance was polished and convincing, hitting every talking point designed to generate sympathy for Richard. She spoke about his charitable donations, his business success, his plans for the baby. Richard was looking forward to being a father. He had already set up college funds, designed a nursery, planned for his daughter's future. The idea that he would deliberately harm his pregnant wife is absurd. But Grace made a critical error in her prepared statement. She mentioned specific details about the nursery design that only Richard could have known, details from conversations that took place after his arrest while he was supposed to have no contact with his family. She just admitted to violating the no-contact order, Detective Brooks realized. Grace has been communicating with Richard in jail. Margaret Lane immediately filed a motion to revoke Grace's bail for violating court orders. This shows the Hamilton family believes they're above the law. That evening, Claire made a decision that surprised everyone. She called her own press conference. I didn't want to be here, Claire said, standing outside the courthouse with her hand on her pregnant belly. I didn't want to be the face of domestic violence. I wanted to be a private person raising my daughter in peace. The assembled reporters hung on every word. But Richard Hamilton and his family have made this public. They've attacked my character, questioned my motives, and tried to buy my silence. So let me be clear about what really happened. Claire's voice grew stronger as she continued. Richard Hamilton threw a 2-pound book at my head because I discovered he was giving our baby's college fund to his ex-girlfriend. He caused brain trauma that could have killed me and our unborn daughter. When he realized the severity of what he'd done, his first call wasn't to 911, it was to his lawyer. The Hamilton family has spent 15 years covering up Richard's violence against women. They've paid victims to stay quiet, intimidated witnesses, and used their wealth to avoid consequences. That ends now. Claire's statement went viral within hours. The image of a pregnant woman standing alone against a wealthy family's intimidation tactics resonated with people across the country. You did the right thing, Dr. Morris said as they watched the evening news coverage. I finally feel like myself again, Claire replied. For years, Richard convinced me I was weak, that I needed his protection, but standing up to him, telling the truth publicly, this is who I really am. The trial was set to begin in 1 week. Richard's defense team had exhausted their character assassination tactics and failed to shake the core evidence. The case would ultimately be decided on facts, not spin. As Claire prepared for the most important testimony of her life, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, confidence in her own strength and the righteousness of her cause. The battle for justice was entering its final phase, and Claire Hamilton was ready to fight. The courthouse steps were crowded with media, domestic violence advocates, and supporters as Claire Hamilton's case against her millionaire husband went to trial. After weeks of character assassination and legal maneuvering, the moment of truth had finally arrived. Claire sat in the witness box, her hand resting on her 8-month pregnant belly, facing the jury that would decide Richard's fate. She had rehearsed this moment countless times with Margaret Lane, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality of confronting her abuser in open court. Mrs. Hamilton, please tell the jury what happened on the night of March 15th, Margaret Lane began. Claire took a deep breath and began her testimony. Her voice was clear and steady as she described discovering the missing money, confronting Richard about his ex-girlfriend, and the moment his rage exploded into violence. He grabbed the Steve Jobs biography from his desk and threw it at my head with all his strength. The impact was so severe that I lost consciousness immediately. What was the last thing you remember before losing consciousness? Richard screaming that I would never embarrass him again. The courtroom was silent as Claire continued her testimony, describing years of escalating abuse, financial control, and psychological manipulation. Richard's defense attorney, Mitchell Stevens, tried repeatedly to object, but Margaret Lane's questions were perfectly crafted. Mrs. Hamilton, why didn't you leave your husband before this incident? Because he convinced me that I was nothing without him, that no one would believe me if I accused him of abuse, that his wealth and connections would ensure I lost custody of our child if I ever tried to leave. When Margaret Lane finished her direct examination, Mitchell Stevens approached for cross-examination like a predator stalking wounded prey. Mrs. Hamilton, isn't it true that you married my client primarily for his money? No, that's not true. You had significant student loan debt when you met Richard. Correct. I paid for my own education. Yes. And Richard paid off those loans after your marriage. Richard insisted on paying them. I never asked him to. Stevens continued his attack, questioning Claire's memory due to her head injury, suggesting she had exaggerated the violence, implying she was motivated by greed. But Claire remained calm and consistent, her testimony unshaken by his aggressive tactics. Mr. Stevens, your client threw a 2-pound book at my head while I was 7 months pregnant. No amount of money could compensate for nearly losing my life and my daughter's life. The prosecution's case grew stronger with each witness. Dr. Eugene Carter testified about Claire's injuries, emphasizing that the trauma pattern was consistent with assault, not an accidental fall. Dr. Vivian Morris took the stand as both a medical expert and a mother. Her testimony about examining Claire's injuries was devastating to the defense. In 30 years as a neurologist, I have never seen impact trauma this severe from a household accident. The force required to create this injury pattern could only come from a deliberate assault. Detective Shannon Brooks testified about the evidence Richard's called to his lawyer before calling 911. The blood-stained book found in the hospital dumpster, the security footage showing Richard disposing of evidence. But the most powerful testimony came from Richard's previous victims. Jennifer Walsh flew in from Portland to describe the prep school incident, her voice strong despite the decades that had passed. Richard Hamilton pushed me down a flight of stairs because I wanted to break up with him. His family paid mine to keep quiet. I've regretted my silence ever since. Jessica Morrison, visibly nervous but determined, testified about the coffee table assault and the hush money Richard had paid her. He shoved me into a glass table during an argument. I needed 12 stitches. When I threatened to call police, Grace Hamilton offered me money to disappear. I took it because I was scared and young. I've regretted that decision every day since. 2 other women testified about similar incidents, establishing a clear pattern of escalating violence over 15 years. Richard's defense tried to portray him as a successful businessman who had simply lost his temper once. They brought character witnesses who testified about his charitable donations and business accomplishments. Richard Hamilton has created thousands of jobs and donated millions to charity, one witness claimed, but Margaret Lane's rebuttal was devastating. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, charitable donations don't excuse attempted murder. Business success doesn't give anyone the right to assault pregnant women. When Richard finally took the stand in his own defense, his testimony was a disaster. Under Margaret Lane's cross-examination, his carefully rehearsed story fell apart. Mr. Hamilton, you called your attorney before calling 911 for your injured wife, correct? I was confused, not thinking clearly. Confused enough to call your lawyer, but not confused enough to get medical help for your pregnant wife. That's not how it happened. Margaret Lane presented the phone records showing the exact times of Richard's calls. So you were clear-headed enough to protect yourself legally, but too confused to help your bleeding, unconscious wife. Richard's arrogance began to show through his coached demeanor. You don't understand the pressure I was under. Claire was threatening to destroy my reputation over a simple business decision. Simple business decision, you were funding your ex-girlfriend's apartment with your family's money. That was a temporary arrangement, Richard said defensively. Temporary. You signed a 2-year lease commitment. You spent your unborn daughter's college fund on another woman? How is that temporary? Richard's composure cracked completely. Claire was being unreasonable. She was threatening to call her mother, to make a scene. I had to make her understand. Make her understand by throwing a book at her head. It wasn't supposed to hit her. I was just trying to get her attention. The courtroom erupted. Richard had just confessed to throwing the book deliberately. Mitchell Stevens looked like he wanted to disappear. So you admit you threw the book at your pregnant wife intentionally? Richard realized his mistake too late. That's not what I meant. Mr. Hamilton, you just testified under oath that you deliberately threw a book at your 7 months pregnant wife's head. Is that your testimony? I want to clarify, yes or no. Mr. Hamilton, did you intentionally throw a book at Claire's head? The silence stretched for 30 seconds before Richard finally answered. Yes, but I never meant to hurt her. Margaret Lane had gotten the confession she needed. The rest of Richard's testimony was merely damage control that couldn't undo his admission of intentional assault. During closing arguments, Margaret Lane summarized the overwhelming evidence. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about power, control, and violence. Richard Hamilton believed his wealth put him above the law. He believed he could assault his pregnant wife and buy his way out of consequences. The evidence shows a 15-year pattern of violence against women, covered up by his family's money. 4 victims, 4 incidents, 4 cover-ups, until now. Claire Hamilton refused to be silenced. She refused to take the money and disappear. She chose to stand up for herself, for her unborn daughter, and for every woman who has been told that wealthy men's violence doesn't matter. Mitchell Stevens' closing argument focused on Richard's lack of criminal history and his contributions to society. My client made a terrible mistake in a moment of stress, but one mistake shouldn't destroy a man's entire life. The argument fell flat after Richard's own confession to intentional assault. The jury deliberated for only 2 hours. When they returned, the 4 women stood to deliver the verdict. On the charge of felony domestic violence, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of assault on a pregnant woman, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of witness tampering, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of filing a false police report, we find the defendant guilty. Claire felt tears streaming down her face as each guilty verdict was read. In the gallery, Dr. Morris and Tyler embraced. Nadine squeezed Claire's shoulder supportively. Richard sat frozen as his world collapsed around him. Grace Hamilton sobbed in the front row, finally understanding that money couldn't buy her son's freedom. Judge Patricia Hernandez scheduled sentencing for the following week. Mr. Hamilton, you will remain in custody without bail. The court finds you pose a continuing danger to the community. Outside the courthouse, Claire faced a sea of reporters and supporters. Domestic violence advocates cheered as she emerged with her legal team. Today's verdict sends a clear message, Claire said into the microphones. Wealth and privilege don't excuse violence. No woman should have to endure what I endured. No child should grow up watching their father abuse their mother. Richard Hamilton will face consequences for his actions. But more importantly, other victims will see that justice is possible. Speaking the truth is possible. Holding abusers accountable is possible. A week later, Judge Hernandez sentenced Richard to 8 years in state prison, followed by 5 years of probation. Grace Hamilton received 2 years for witness tampering and obstruction of justice. Mr. Hamilton, you systematically abused women for 15 years. Judge Hernandez said, you used your wealth and family connections to silence your victims. You showed no remorse for nearly killing your pregnant wife. This sentence reflects the serious nature of your crimes and the need to protect the community from your violence. As Richard was led away in handcuffs, Claire felt a sense of closure she hadn't expected. The man who had controlled and terrorized her was finally facing consequences. It's over, Dr. Morris said as they left the courthouse. No, Mom, it's just beginning, Claire replied, her hand on her belly. Now I get to raise my daughter in a world where she knows her mother fought for justice, where she knows that speaking the truth matters more than staying quiet. The legal battle was won, but Claire's real victory was deeper. She had reclaimed her voice, her strength, and her future. Richard Hamilton's reign of terror was over, and Claire's new life was about to begin. 3 months after Richard's conviction, Claire gave birth to a healthy 7-pound daughter in the same hospital where she had nearly lost her life. Dr. Vivian Morris held her granddaughter for the first time, tears streaming down her face as she marveled at the tiny miracle who had survived so much trauma. "She's perfect," Dr. Morris whispered, carefully placing baby Emma Claire Hamilton into her mother's arms. "She's a fighter, just like her mom," Tyler said, beaming at his sister and niece. Claire looked down at her daughter's peaceful face and felt a surge of protective love unlike anything she had ever experienced. "I promise you'll never see the violence I saw, sweetheart. You'll grow up knowing you're strong, knowing you're valued, knowing you deserve to be treated with respect." The past 3 months had been a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media attention, and personal healing. Richard's conviction had made national headlines, inspiring other domestic violence survivors to come forward with their own stories. Claire had been contacted by dozens of women who credited her courage with giving them strength to leave abusive relationships. "There's someone here to see you," Nadine announced from the doorway. Detective Shannon Brooks entered the hospital room, carrying flowers and wearing a broad smile. "Congratulations, Claire. She's beautiful. Thank you for everything. Shannon, I couldn't have done this without you." "Actually, you could have. You're stronger than you ever knew." Detective Brooks pulled out an envelope. "I have some news. The California legislature just passed new domestic violence legislation inspired by your case. It's called the Claire Hamilton Act." Claire looked up in surprise. "What does it do?" "It creates harsher penalties for domestic violence against pregnant women, eliminates spousal immunity in abuse cases, and provides funding for victim advocacy programs. Your courage to testify has literally changed the law." The weight of that impact was overwhelming. Claire's decision to prosecute Richard hadn't just protected her and Emma, it had created protections for countless other women. "There's more," Detective Brooks continued. "I've been asked to head a new domestic violence task force. We're going to focus specifically on cases involving wealthy defendants who try to buy their way out of consequences." Richard's conviction really did send a message, didn't it? "Absolutely. We've had 3 other high-profile domestic violence arrests in the past month. Victims are coming forward because they saw that justice is possible." Dr. Morris had been quietly listening to the conversation while holding her granddaughter. "Claire, I've been thinking about what comes next for you." "What do you mean?" "You've become a powerful voice for domestic violence survivors. Have you considered making that work official?" Claire had been wrestling with the same question. During the trial, she had discovered a passion for advocacy that she never knew existed. "I've thought about it, but I don't know where to start." "Start with speaking," Tyler suggested. "You've already gotten requests from women's organizations, law enforcement agencies, even medical schools." It was true. Claire had received dozens of invitations to speak about her experience, to help train police officers in recognizing domestic violence, to address groups of survivors. "I want to help other women, but I also want to be present for Emma's childhood." "Who says you can't do both?" Dr. Morris asked. "I'm retiring next month to help with Emma. You could speak part-time, write, consult on legislation, make your experience count." 2 weeks later, Claire stood at a podium in downtown Los Angeles, addressing a conference of domestic violence advocates. Emma slept peacefully in a carrier beside the stage while Claire shared her story with an audience of survivors, advocates, and law enforcement professionals. Domestic violence doesn't discriminate based on income, education, or social status, Claire said. Richard Hamilton was charming, successful, and respected in our community. That's exactly what made him so dangerous. Abusers often target strong, accomplished women because they enjoy the challenge of breaking them down. They isolate you from support systems, convince you that their version of reality is the only truth, and make you believe you're powerless to leave. Claire looked out at the audience, seeing nods of recognition from survivors who understood exactly what she was describing. "But here's what I learned: you are never as powerless as your abuser wants you to believe. The moment you speak the truth to a friend, a family member, law enforcement, you begin reclaiming your power." My mother, Dr. Vivian Morris, often says that the most dangerous moment for a domestic violence victim is when they decide to leave. That's when abusers escalate to lethal violence. But the most powerful moment is when you decide to fight back through the legal system. After her speech, Claire was approached by Maria Santos, a young woman whose husband had been arrested for domestic violence the previous month. "Mrs. Hamilton, thank you for speaking out. My husband's family has money, not as much as your husband's, but enough to hire expensive lawyers. They're trying to convince me to drop the charges." "What does your gut tell you? That if I drop the charges, he'll hurt me worse next time. Trust that instinct. Domestic violence escalates. The legal system isn't perfect, but it's the best protection we have." Maria's eyes filled with tears. "I'm scared of what happens if he goes to prison. How will I support my children? There are resources available, victim advocacy programs, financial assistance, job training. You're not alone in this fight." Claire exchanged contact information with Maria, adding her to a growing network of women she was mentoring through the legal process. On the drive home, Claire reflected on how much her life had changed. 6 months ago, she had been trapped in an abusive marriage, isolated from support, convinced she was powerless. Now she was using her experience to help other women find their strength. "Emma, your mom has become quite the activist," Tyler observed from the driver's seat. "I never thought of myself as an activist. I just wanted justice." Sometimes those are the same thing. At home in Beverly Hills, the house that was now legally hers after Richard's conviction, Claire walked through rooms that no longer held terror. She had redecorated completely, removing all traces of Richard's presence and creating a warm, safe environment for Emma. Dr. Morris was in the kitchen, preparing dinner and reviewing the day's news. "The Los Angeles Times wants to do a follow-up story on Richard's sentencing. Are you interested?" "What kind of story?" "About your advocacy work, the new legislation, the impact your case has had on other survivors." Claire considered it. 6 months ago, media attention had been terrifying. Now it felt like an opportunity to reach more women who needed to hear that escape was possible. "I'll do it, but only if they include information about victim resources. I want women reading the story to know where to get help." That evening, as Claire fed Emma her bottle, she thought about the future she was building for her daughter. Emma would grow up in a world where her mother's courage had literally changed laws. She would know that speaking truth to power was not only possible, but necessary. "Your daddy is in prison for what he did to us," Claire whispered to Emma. "But you'll never be defined by his violence. You'll be defined by how we rebuilt our lives afterward." Dr. Morris joined them in the nursery, settling into the rocking chair beside Claire. "Any word from Richard's appeals attorney?" "His conviction was upheld. No new trial, no reduced sentence. He'll serve the full 8 years. "Good. How do you feel about that?" Claire was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "I don't feel angry anymore. I feel free. For the first time in years, I'm not afraid of Richard. I'm not worried about his reaction to my choices. I'm just focused on building the best life possible for Emma and myself. And helping other women do the same. And helping other women do the same," Claire agreed. 6 months later, Claire published a memoir about her experience titled "Breaking the Silence: A Survivor's Guide to Prosecuting Domestic Violence." The book became a bestseller, with proceeds funding domestic violence shelters and legal advocacy programs. She testified before Congress about the need for federal domestic violence legislation, consulted with police departments on improving their response to abuse cases, and spoke at law schools about prosecuting wealthy defendants. Most importantly, she raised Emma in an environment of love, safety, and empowerment. Emma's first word was "Mama," spoken while Claire was preparing for a speaking engagement about survivor advocacy. Richard Hamilton served his full sentence and was released after 8 years to a world that no longer recognized his name or influence. His company had collapsed during his incarceration. His fortune had been depleted by legal fees and victim compensation, and his reputation was permanently destroyed. Claire had moved on to a life of purpose and meaning, using her experience to create change that would protect future generations of women. She had transformed her trauma into a force for justice, proving that even the darkest experiences could become sources of light for others. Emma grew up knowing her mother was a hero, not because she had endured violence, but because she had refused to let that violence define her future. Claire Hamilton had not just survived domestic abuse, She had used her survival to build a better world for her daughter and countless other women. The book that Richard had thrown at Claire's head was meant to silence her forever. Instead, it had given her a voice that would echo through legislation, court cases, and the lives of women who found courage in her example. Claire finally understood that protecting her daughter meant protecting herself first, a lesson that would guide every decision for the rest of their lives. In breaking her own silence, she had given other women permission to speak their truth. In seeking justice for herself, she had created justice for generations of survivors who would follow. The millionaire who had thrown a book at his pregnant wife was now just a cautionary tale. But the woman who had survived, fought back, and built a new life from the ashes of trauma, she had become a legend.